Aloha friends, it's Maria and Craig, and we're here to talk to you about personal fat threshold.
So personal fat threshold, we've talked about it a few times in other videos, and even explained it in detail in one of our other videos about how to lose weight and reverse insulin resistance, which I'll put a link up here.
That's such a good video.
To that video. It's a great video overall. But we want to talk specifically just about personal fat threshold, because there is some confusion out there.
Yeah, I've seen some videos that are not correct.
Yeah, and so we want to talk about what it really is, what it means, and how it's important, especially when it comes to like insulin resistance and reversing.
Because here's the thing, a lot of people are like, weight loss isn't my goal, but yet they have type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance.
The healing side.
And the best way to reverse that is to shrink the fat cells and to gain or at least maintain your muscle. And so we're not always chasing weight loss, but that helps get rid of inflammation. It helps get rid of so many things. It's easier on your joints and stuff. So in a way, that's healing in many ways.
Many conditions where simply losing the excess weight will help improve those health conditions.
I think we get like, sometimes people are harsh on us because we're always about weight loss, but we're not.
It's a big component of healing.
It's a big component of healing, but we deal with cancer and MS and Parkinson's.
We've had Crohn's patients who had to gain weight and help with their healing.
I remember that, Michaela.
We helped them as well. But back to personal fat threshold, let's talk about it, and let's talk about what it is and why it's important. Personal fat threshold it's when we grow up, and you may have heard this, and I heard this when I was young, and I thought it was a very interesting fact, but I never really thought anything of it afterwards for years until recently, and that is that you make new fat cells. So you have something called adipose tissue. Adipose tissues are the cells where you store fat inside of. So those are your fat cells. Those adipose tissues, those cells, you only make so many of them when you're young. Usually when you're very young, you're an adolescent, toddler, you build new fat cells. And then you get to a certain age, for whatever reason, I don't know what the reason may be. Maybe it's reduced stem cells or a lot of things like this that could affect it. But at some age, almost everyone stops making new fat cells. And then from that point on in their life, they will either, if they gain weight, they just fill up their fat cells more. If they lose weight, they shrink their fat cells. And I remember hearing this a long time ago, and I didn't understand how important this concept was. But now, with what we deal with clients, it's a very important concept to understand.
But because this is why we'll have type 2 diabetics that are 110 pounds. They don't have a lot of fat cells, but the ones that they have are completely stuffed full. And this is why we also had a client, Tyler, who 450 pounds, didn't have any metabolic diseases because was a freak of nature, could grow more fat cells.
Yeah, so like
that's a safety mechanism. That's actually a way to protect yourself.
Yeah, so that was actually the exception. There are some people that can make new fat cells, but it's very rare, like very rare. Usually you get 100 pounds of excess weight on your body, you're going to start getting insulin resistant, and it's going to show up in your markers. But there's a rare genetic like him where he can make new fat cells, and he was, A1C of 5.4, even though he was 500 pounds. It was crazy. But back to this topic, for the vast majority of people, you only make so many, and you can't make new ones, and so then you just fill or shrink the fat cells you do have. Well, what if you're that person who was never overweight, you were lean as a kid, and you don't have a lot of fat cells? Well, later in life, it can be seen as a benefit because you don't gain a lot of weight, it seems. They can eat whatever they want, and they're 100, like Maria said, we have women that are 105 pounds that are type 2 diabetic because they don't have a lot of fat cells.
Jennifer came to me, and she was 30 years old, just had her first child, and she said, Maria, I wish I would gain weight when I cheated because I'm going to kill myself. She was having strokes because her blood sugars are so crazy. But to you and I, we look at her and she looks so healthy. Yeah. We are a vain society, and we don't change anything until it's it's on the outside. But there's a lot of inflammation going on the inside on those people.
And what was really happening with her is she didn't have a lot of fat cells. She had a very low personal fat threshold. Okay.
What does that mean?
If her personal fat threshold was low because she didn't have a lot of fat cells. So you don't have a lot of places to put fat. And the thing about a fat cell is you can only stuff it so full. It gets to a point where it's stuffed so full of fat that it can't store any more fat inside of it. It rejects insulin, so it becomes insulin resistant, the fat cell does, to stop more fat from coming in because it's already too full. And if you get another fat cell that becomes insulin resistant because it's too full, and another, pretty soon if you have not a lot of fat cells, and a lot of these fat cells are insulin resistant and not allowing fat to come in, now the body's in kind of a crisis mode because you're going to continue eating. Well, the food that's coming in, the fat that's coming in the diet, it's running out of places to put it, right? And so you have elevated triglycerides in the blood. You start accumulating fat in areas it shouldn't be, like the liver, the pancreas, those kind of things.
So you're saying you can eat too much fat on a ketogenic diet?
Yeah, and that's all about the other video that we will have linked into this show notes.
So so you're saying the fat you eat is going right where? It has two places to go.
Yeah, the fat you eat. So I mean, we can go down this path if we want, but that I think is another video about where fat goes when you eat it. But suffice it to say that if you have a small number of fat cells and they're full of fat, there's no place to store fat anymore, and so the body runs out of places to put fat, and you have metabolic syndrome. You have insulin resistance because all the fat cells are insulin resistant. They're stopping fat from coming in.
Where I was going with that is some people think that like fat is what you should focus on because it doesn't raise insulin. So you're saying that too much fat is going to go into the fat cells and cause more insulin resistance?
So when you eat fat, it does raise insulin. It raises insulin a smaller amount than protein or carbs, but it does raise insulin because you do have to store it. If you don't store the fat that you eat,
you die.
You know, your blood has maybe 100 calories at rest of total fuel. That's all the fat, all the ketones, all the glucose in your bloodstream. And when you eat a meal of 500 or 1,000 calories, you got to get that out of the blood. You got to put it somewhere, and so if you leave it in the blood, you're gonna have sky high triglycerides. You don't want that. But again, if they run out of places to put it, now you do have sky high triglycerides because the body can't get rid of it, and the body's kind of in crisis mode, and you're insulin resistant, and you're type 2 diabetic. Now that happens to somebody who's 100 pounds. You can have a lot more fat cells, so you have a lot higher personal fat threshold, and you can gain 100 pounds and still not be running out of space, still not be running out of fat cells to stuff it into, and not as insulin resistant as that 105-pound person because they don't have hardly any fat cells, right? And so that's your personal fat threshold. If you have a really low one, you can't gain much weight before you become insulin resistant. If you have a really high personal fat threshold, you can gain a lot of weight, sometimes over 100 pounds, without becoming insulin resistant.
You had a great interview with Judy Cho, right? And what I love, you were explaining this to her, you were discussing it with her, and how she said, yeah, absolutely, I'm testing my patients that are eating a stick of butter because someone told them to. It's kind of been the fad lately is like sticker butter a day, where people are adding a stick of butter to their steak or their whatever they're eating. And what I love about like what Judy is doing is that she's a doctor and she's testing her patients and seeing what's happening when they eat this way. And she see time and time again, she would see these people with their triglycerides would shoot way up when they started adding that stick of butter a day. And nobody wants high triglycerides in the blood. That is not a healthy situation. We've talked many times about your triglyceride to HDL ratio being so important. You want HDL to be at or above your triglyceride level. That's the ideal. And if triglycerides are shooting up, that's not the way you want to go for health.
And she sees that with her clients when they add a stick
But
of
we're
butter.
hearing that. I thought that we were past that dogma where you're not losing weight, add a stick of butter, but we're still hearing it time and time again.
Yeah, and you just got to ask those people, ask
Where does the
everyone,
fat go?
where does the fat you eat go?
It's biology. Yes, we're all different because everybody will say,
Yeah.
well, we're all different. It works for
Not
me.
in the way we process carbohydrates and fat and protein.
Right, it's biology.
That's biology, and the only time that deviates is when you have a genetic defect like Pompeii,
Yep.
where they can't actually
Store fructose.
process fructose, so they've got a genetic defect. That's the only exception, right? Everything else, you're going to process fat, protein, and carbs largely the same in your body.
We get a lot of people say, oh, worked for me. And what we see in those clients is they lost a lot of muscle mass. So worked for me meant the scale went down, but in the wrong way because they lost muscle mass. If you're focusing on, 70, 80% fat, we don't like to do percentages, but if they're focusing on a lot of fat, very little protein because of mTOR or whatever, they lose a lot of muscle mass, and that will show on the scale, but in the long run, that's not the plan that you want to be. That just means you eat less and less. And
Body composition is so much more important,
less
and
strong.
especially as you get
bones
older.
need muscle. You don't want to lose your bone.
Your
the
bones
muscle.
need protein. Protein is so important for bone health as you age as well,
Sure.
preventing those breaks.
Yep.
So, but personal fat threshold, that's what we're talking about, and that is the basic concept, right? You either have a lot of fat cells or very little fat cells, but in either case, once you stuff them, once you get them too full, and too many of these fat cells are overstuffed, inflamed, and rejecting insulin, you're insulin resistant. And that's how you can be insulin resistant at 100 pounds or insulin resistant at 400 pounds.
And you know what we're going to do with our comments? Because with people with their testimonies, it's so inspirational. If you have a testimony of lowering the fat and it worked, or hiring, I want to hear every all of it. Comment below with your testimony on how changing your lever of protein to fat has helped you with your success. We'd love to hear that, and what you'd like us to discuss next, right?
Thanks, everyone.
Please share this video with your friends and just teach them how food is medicine.
It is.
If you want to change your life like I've changed mine with food, I would be honored to help you. Many of you don't know that I was twice my size. I had acid reflux. I had PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. I had depression. I had IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome. And food changed my life. And not only did that happen, I get to eat good food, right? Good food. So if you want to eat good food, I have perfected meal plans made by me and personal help with supplements or modifications if you have Hashimoto's, if you have Graves', if you have IBS, if you have PCOS, contact me. I would be honored to help you. You can go to keto-adapted.com and find a lot of different options there for personalized help, or message me by commenting below on this YouTube video, or you can check me out at mariamindbodyhealth.com. Mahalo.